Hello, hello. Let me just turn the drum and bass down. Okay, welcome back to Paint Like Fiends, the show where I ruin a brand new model. In this episode, they'll actually be painting, which is a great start. So you got the figure, undercoated, based, ready to go. What I missed last time in the colour selection was actually base coating the base. So with this, it's going to be kind of like, I guess, a rough, gravelly, vaguely desert-like base for it. So I've got a few colours, sort of dull grey brown, dull brown. This will be for the skull on the base. So just kind of general muted colours, I guess, depending on kind of what style you're after. You know, you can pick greys, browns, greens. I guess I'm going for like a kind of sort of desert wasteland look, which will kind of fit with the skull, I think, as well, and provide a contrast to the figure, which will have kind of more luxurious and richer colours. So a few things, if you can see here, I've got my painting board. Now this is a real Paint Like Fiend pro tip. A bit of foam, because I am kind of clumsy for, I guess, a display painter, and quite good at dropping the figures. But if it lands on foam, that's fine. Really, really useful this. I'd have broken a lot of figures and had it just one slip and you could snap off a lot of little parts on this. Water. Crappy old palette, despite the fact it's got dry paint in it. I've thoroughly scrubbed this, so none of this will come off. I don't use a wet palette, I just keep topping up with a bit of water. I'm not super fussy about kind of you know, paint thinning and stuff like that. I just kind of do it by instinct as I paint. Some brushes, let's see if I can get these up. So mixture of brushes here. Got a Citadel brush for kind of base coating. They are, obviously being Citadel, they're kind of fairly crap unless you go for the super expensive ones. Good for base coating. Really rough old Citadel brush for base coating the base. A couple of dry brushes for the base, and some proper brushes. I forget what is this? Pro Art Sable, quite nice. Not as fancy as the Winsor & Newton, but they're pretty good overall. And obligatory Winsor & Newton Series 7. If you're not using these, you might as well just paint with a bloody like biro or something. These are the business. But they're expensive and you've got to look after them, but for kind of high quality detail painting, really, really good. Okay. So, assuming I can get the visibility on this right, I'm going to start applying some stone colours. Now I'm going to do the stones in a sort of a darker grey, the gravel in a lighter grey, and the sand in a lighter grey still, just kind of get an interesting gradation for that. So, thinning paint down, give it a good shake. This paint, it's kind of gloopy. I don't think this needs to be thinned down a lot, because if I lose a bit of detail on the base is all quite rough and rugged anyway. With the you know, the gravel and stuff, that's quite a crisp detail, so I could lose a bit of that and it will still be fine. So I will probably thin down. This is, hopefully I'll get this on camera. Put a bit of that in. So that's a bit of paint, that's a bit of water. That's about as accurate as it gets with me. In fact, you can't even see it. There we go. I don't know, is that 2 to 1? I'm not really bothered. I might even put a bit more paint in. And just rub it off on the edges. This will obviously is quite thin, so it'll take 2 coats, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this on my thumb so you can see the paint consistency. So I've got a fair bit on the brush. Again, we're kind of covering some biggish areas, and it doesn't matter if we fill in a little bit of the detail. So I'm applying it perhaps thicker than you would on fully detailed areas. It's coming out okay, cool. with that. I'll probably do the actual kind of grounding beneath this colour as well, so you can kind of see, not quite covering fully, but that's okay. I'll give this a few coats. And this, I'm being quite rough with the brushwork. And I say it doesn't really matter at this stage, the first coat, how neat it is. Plus it doesn't matter so much on the base. The base, there'll be dry brushing, maybe a bit of washing, be fairly rough and ready techniques. The base is kind of natural, organic, and it's only the backdrop of the figure. It doesn't need to be kind of super neat overall. So let's see, this is kind of coating okay. So I'm just going to do these bits on the ground here, partly because this is a darkish colour, so it'll provide a decent backdrop for the other colours. Let's get all these bits in there. Say the undercoat here already has provided sort of reasonable kind of greyish look that this paint sits over well. See, I'm really like kind of just shoving the brush in there. It doesn't really matter. These are the deepest recesses. They don't need to be super neat. Okay, so I'll let that dry. Okay, back. I'm going to do the next colour on here, which will be the thicker gravel. Again, sort of nice muted grey-brown colour. If the lid will stay open, which it won't, so whatever. Okay, so a little bit of this on the palette, like that. A little bit less water this time, because it's doesn't need to flow so well on the gravel. Probably that much will do. And simply these gravelly bits, just push it into there. It doesn't matter if it goes a bit onto the pale gravel, because that'll be covered in a moment, but it's good to keep it off the grey bits you've already done. I guess this is kind of like a sort of rock that's chipped away, not maybe as weathered as the larger bits, a bit fresher, so it'll be a bit sort of a paler colour. This at the front. So because you're dealing with a very rough, abrasive texture here, and you've just got to apply a fair amount of paint to it, and you don't need for it to be super detailed and neat. This is why I'm using a really old rubbishy brush. Sort of almost just kind of pushing it in to make sure it goes into all the gaps. That. Okay, a little bit more at the back. So the brush is, it's got a fair bit of paint on it here again. Due to the nature of the area, it doesn't need to be really precise. A few little bits under there. I hope this was visible on the screen. So that's that bit done. Now actually, because this is a pretty self-contained area for this brown, even before it's dry, I can go ahead and do the paler sand. So I'll go and do that, start that now. So just going to go for the, I reckon, whatever this is, carrot stone. Yeah, might be a bit pale, but I think I might just put a wash over this lot afterwards, tone it down a bit. Yeah, it's a bit better. So put this. I'm actually not even going to use the palette properly. Just dump it on here. Tiny bit of water. I'm going to have quite a lot on the brush for this because it is so fine, the surface, that you need to really let it soak into it. So just dabbing it on and trying to keep control over it at the edges, but really kind of get the surface thoroughly sort of coated, like so. Little bits in there. So it doesn't matter if the edge is a little bit scrappy, as long as you don't go too far onto the other parts. Dab it into there. It's all kind of like, it's all done by sort of dabbing this. You try and paint it along the surface, it'll almost be like an overbrushing thing where you just catch the raised grains. Now, what I'm going to do after this is, I'm actually going to leave the base. I've only had one coat on this, I possibly need another coat. What I'm going to do is my own particular way of doing things is to base coat almost all the colours on the model first. There's a couple of reasons why I do this. The main one is because I tend to make little mistakes when I paint and it annoys me having to paint over them. The most mistakes you tend to make are when you're base coating, because you're applying a lot of paint at that time. It's very easy to get paint on areas that it's not intended to. So I find if I base coat all in one go, I can correct mistakes a lot easier as I'm doing the base, successive base coats. If I do a colour that's fully painted, and then I base coat another colour next to it, and I make mistakes on the fully painted colour, which I've just kind of like highlighted and shaded and stuff, it'd be very frustrating doing so. It also gives me an idea of what the model will look like, get my kind of colour scheme working, get all the colours on there and you see is it working, so I don't have to repaint too much later on. And also it means that if you suddenly find yourself pressed for time, having to complete the model quickly, you tend to get things to a uniform standard. So if it's all base coated, and like, hang on a sec, I can't spend another 10 hours on this. And then you can do, right, I'm just going to do a quick wash, a quick highlight in all the areas. Well, if you spend 5 hours doing the flash, painstakingly blending it, and then suddenly you need this model for a tournament or whatever next weekend, and all the other areas you can only do to a simple standard, it won't be very harmonious. So I tend to base coat the base, all the colours first, then I redo the base, and I actually do a little bit of the base painting initially, because some of the methods used on the base are quite rough, bit of dry brushing, bit of washing, that these can go over onto the main part of the model. If it's only base coated at that stage, again, it's much easier to touch that up. I find if I do all of the base at the end, then I could be making a lot of mistakes on the finished model. Try to avoid that. Okay, so I'll wait for the base to dry, and then we'll get to base coating the non-base, the actual figure. Okay, base coating the actual model. This is where it starts to get kind of fun, I guess. So, is he visible? He's visible. So I'm just going to base coat a few areas, and generally the principles will apply to all of it. Base coating is where you start to focus on one of the most important things of the model, which is getting smooth, neat coverage. This can be, I guess, tricky with paints that are slightly translucent. Just putting a bit of paint on my palette, where you need to do multiple layers of it, for example, to get a good base coat coverage. Or just kind of working with the model, with the detail and stuff. Now, one thing I find is key to this is getting the right amount, getting the right amount of paint on your brush, and using your brush to kind of go along with the lines of the models, kind of not across them, not contrary to the flow of the model, but go actually along the surfaces. This is partly why I have the model, I hold the model, and sometimes if I'm painting, I'll hold it by the head, I can tilt it around. So if I want to paint a section on the arm here, like that, underneath, that's going to be, if I'm holding it on some kind of cork shit from below, that's going to be really hard to kind of tilt and get it right. If I'm holding it, pinching like this, I can turn it right the way upside down and get really smooth lines painting along there. Okay, let's put some paint on. This is, I'm going to do the cloth at the back first, because it's a lovely big clean surface to demonstrate some. So I've got paint here on my brush. It is only a tiny bit thin now. It's pale purple. It might be a bit too pale for the moment. I'm not really sure. So the amount of paint, that at the moment on there, on the brush, a bit too much. I'm going to put it off like that. Now just apply it along the lines of the model. You see how neatly that goes on? Like that. And then there's areas, push it into those areas. Holes like this, put the brush through, twist it around a bit, down here. No, a little bit going to the hole, that doesn't matter. A bit more paint. You can also, I mean, if you do have a bit too much paint on your brush, if I paint like that on there, that's a bit much for that part, but I can spread it around. I've got a lot of area to cover here. So I can put the brush on there, and while it's still wet, you've got to do it while it's wet, because otherwise you'll get it streaky. Just bring it down. So there's a little bit of streak going on there, but we'll need 2 coats on this, so that doesn't really matter so much. Again, I've got to get to that area. If I do it across the top, across this detail here, I won't be able to get in fully, so I can turn it upside down. A little bit more paint, just check it's about the right amount. Go into there, push it into the recesses, and then put it along the lines of the model, like so. You see it getting a little bit on the belt there. That's why I'm doing this section that's kind of further, I guess, inside the model first, so I can touch up the areas that are overlapping it later on. Do the edge as well, just using the side of the brush for that. Underneath here. Again, you're using kind of different strokes at this point. So I can just rubbing it along the side. So making sure it doesn't build up kind of clots and coagulate too much. And on this side as well. Just using the edge of the brush, kind of drag it along there. So there we go, a little bit under there. So already that is quite a pale coat. I'm going to use another coat, but the coverage, well, the neatness of the coverage is fairly good on that. That'll provide a decent base coat. So I'll pick another colour. Let me see. Right, I'm going to do another colour. Definitely going to use. I'm still like kind of making my mind up about the base colours. But I'd go for a medium one or a darker one, depending how I build up shading and highlighting. One thing I think I've got pretty sure is I'm going to start with a dark green on the blade. Right, look at this. That's like as thick as green stuff. So we need to thin this down quite a lot. I will be adding water to this pot later, but for now, get a bit of this gloopy rubbish out. Get it in here. As I say, these are all clean and dry, so put that in. Quite a nice colour. I'm going to thin it down once, twice. Still, it's not super thin. Maybe even a little bit more. Again, thinning down, it's not an exact thing. It depends entirely on the paints and on the situation. So there we go. Right, and wash the brush. Get some paint on the brush. Check on my hand. So, okay. Now this is, I've got maybe a little bit too much paint on the brush, but it's quite thin, and I'll be able to move it around a bit. So if I just put this straight on, ew, blobby and horrible. But I'm going to start pulling it around, again going along into the recesses, nothing of the sword, all the way down. So making sure it doesn't pull too much. This is a paint, not a wash. Maybe I thinned it down too much. You can always take a little bit of water off the brush. Again, so again on there. So again, that's quite, it's a bit too thin. I might do another coat, might do it slightly thicker in terms of paint, but apply it very sparingly on the surface. There you can see this is a pretty nice colour. It's going to be, I'm intending it for it to be darker than this. This is a pretty nice colour already. And moving the model around so I can push it into the recesses. Try not to get too much paint in other aspects of the model. Now that is, no, so it definitely needs more coats, but that's getting there. So more base coating. Let's do a bit of flesh. How about all this muscle stuff at the back? So Rakarth flesh, one of the base colours. Quite a nice, very neutral, palish, slightly grey flesh. Really good for these guys who probably haven't been on the sunbed that often. And there we go. Now this, I'm looking at that. That is, it's kind of pretty thin already. I've obviously added some water to this before, so I'm just going to try this straight out of the pot. Got a bit on my brush, put a bit on my palette, not thinning it down at all, but I'm going to use just quickly going over the curves of the model so it doesn't clog up too much detail. So on his neck there, like that, bring it down, turn it around, get it going into those curves down the back, just going with the flow, that, pushing it in around these recesses, right under the neck thing there, in the recesses. Now because this is unthinned and out of the pot, if I use it for a bit it'll start to go a little bit dry on the brush, so wash the brush, dip it in a bit on the palette, back on the model, back, following the curves, a bit more paint needed there, following the curves around, pulling the brush around the curves of the model, around the muscles, not letting the paint build up in any one area. If you kind of move it around a bit and the paint goes, say, a little bit streaky, or it is a little bit translucent and not covering, so well, that's okay, because you can always do another thin coat to patch that up. What you don't want is for it to build up, to kind of clot, to go lumpy. So get it under there, pull it around. I think the key is the brush angle and the brush strokes, as well as getting the right amount on your brush. See, this is, I guess people would say this is quite thick maybe, the paint, but the way I paint it allows it to keep flowing around the model. See, that's building up a little bit there, but not too much, because I've thinned it a little bit too much there. You can see even on the top I played it fairly thickly. It's getting a decent coat and it's fairly smooth, Okay, let's do a little bit more on this arm, because I'm quite liking doing this flesh. It kind of, you start to see the colours on the model, you start to see kind of the detail and I guess the layout of the model. So that bit under the arm, as I was saying before, holding it this way, let's put it down under there. Now this, because it's pure black under here, it's not getting such good coverage. That's okay, you can just give it another thin coat in a moment. Under the armpit again, that's visible under there. Just making sure I'm working with the paint still wet so I don't get like thick lumpy streaks. There you go, so you're pulling it down over that muscle. Coverage isn't perfect, but it'll only need a little thin second layer and that'll be good. See there, the coverage was bad before. That bit is pretty much dried. Go over it again, gently around that scar. Hopefully that will come out. That's almost opaque now, maybe a tiny bit more. That's not bad for a base coat. Final thing to show on this is some metals. So what have we got? Iron breaker here. Okay, I abandoned the silver because it needs a good stir. I'll have to do that in a moment. I'm going to put some gold on and see how that turns out. This is a new gold. I haven't even opened this yet, so give it a really good shake. So what I'm going to do, rather than change my water pot, I'm just going to dump some water in a spare pot on my palette and use this to clean and thin brush. So I'm going to check this this paint, see how well it covers. That's okay, given that it's going over green, dark green, which is probably exactly the wrong sort of colour. That's not too bad. So the paint seems pretty well thinned down, so I'll just put a bit on my palette. I'm not going to thin it down anymore, I'm just going to see what happens when I apply it. So find somewhere good to start. I guess I'll do it on the shoulder, that's very visible. And this just, wow, that's really quite a nice colour. Okay, make sure I don't have too much of my brush and just kind of run it around. Try and get it along the edges there, but not going onto the armour inset. Make sure it doesn't build up too much in the recesses here, because you'll lose the detail, so just keep, while it's still wet, keep kind of moving it around a bit on the edges here, like so. Just using again the angular brush, always moving the figure so the brush is kind of flowing against the surface. Right, I made a mistake there, classic me. So get a bit of water, try and take that off in advance. Okay, that's not bad. You might need I'm going to need a little bit more paint on that flesh area anyway. So onto here, so there we go, you can see that's the sort of neatness. That's really good. The coverage on this, I'm quite impressed, and it's a nice colour for a kind of rich Tzeentchian gold. As I say, this colour will be the yellowy orange aspect of Tzeentch that would be otherwise missing from the non-metallic colours on the model. So just keep doing a little bit more of this to show. Now these details in here, these the trim, there's also like some quite fine edges, fine details. I'll be doing the inlay of the armour in turquoise, and there will be a little bit of going back and forth. I'm sure there will be some mistakes, some things to tidy up there, but that's only to be expected with the amount of detail on here and having the contrasting colours. Just going around underneath there, using the brush flowing along the edge there to get that. So that's already quite neat where it meets the flesh there. So all of these little bits will need a little bit more paint around, and obviously this is going on the inset, but I will paint the inset in a bit. Okay, I've already been through this step, but apparently I didn't get it on video, which kind of sucks. Trying to make sure I keep the figure in the same place so it's all visible. So I'm going to do some more base coating this time, going over the flesh where it needs a bit more of a coverage, and also doing another couple of colours to see how well they work together. So back to the Rakarth flesh. Now the coverage was pretty decent before, and it still need to go over a few areas. I'm not obviously doing the front areas yet, those all need to be painted. So I'm putting a bit of Rakarth flesh on my palette, adding a little bit of water so it's a little bit thinner, not much water. It's already thin. I've already thinned it a bit in the pot. I don't want it to go everywhere. And then finding some areas where the coverage is not so good. The top was okay, but I'll just go over a little bit, just make sure I haven't got too much on my brush. Follow the curves, the model around, making sure I'm kind of running the brush along the curves of the model, getting it in all the recesses, not putting too much paint on, pulling the paint around while it's still wet to make sure it flows fairly uniform over the surface, like so. And obviously there's a lot more that will need to be done. This area under the arm still needs a bit more coverage. Going to apply a very thin coat on that to not obscure the detail. And this is it's only showing obviously part of the flesh. There's a lot more that needs to be covered on the flesh. This should give an idea of getting a fairly opaque coat on it. Okay, I'm also going to try putting another colour on. So the turquoise is going to obviously be a very big part of this model. So I've got a nice Tzeentch green, that doesn't look green to me, and Stegadon scale green, which looks even less green. Now I'm not really sure which one of these to use. The scale green is quite dark blue. The Tzeentch green is a lovely bright turquoise, maybe a bit too bright. Now I've actually tested the coverage. Tested the coverage of these. I put a little bit of the bright turquoise on and test it on my thumb. That actually covers really nicely on there, as does the stick it on scale green. Both good coverage. One's a little bit too dark, one's a little bit too bright. I'll just go for a half-half mixture and see how that goes. That might be a good base for further shading and highlighting. So again, very precise measurements as always. A little bit of this, a roughly equal amount of that. Mix it together. They're both quite thick out of the pot, so dilute with pretty much, I guess, the same amount of water as paint. Now this is, I guess, this is a bit muted for Tzeentch, but if I use this as a base coat and then highlight up with the brighter turquoises, that could be pretty nice. So a bit of paint on the brush, make sure I haven't got too much. Really got to be more careful with this because we're going into the inset here, and just using that gap there to get the brush in, just painting in the inset. Just using the tip of the brush to go to the edges. Again, it doesn't matter if they make a little mistake at this stage. That can be fixed later. Following the angles of that inset. Again, this is where you need to be a bit more precise than, say, doing the cloak earlier. And then get that little edge section done. Hopefully this is visible under there. Now that is, it's not fully opaque yet. I can also put a bit on the helmet, see how that goes. Like so. Again, follow the curves of the helmet around. Avoid it building up in too many places. I think that's going to be a pretty nice colour. This will be kind of slightly darker base coat, highlighted up with the brighter turquoises and some nice bright edge highlighting. So see the old corn symbol imperfectly sanded out. It's not too visible now. I've got a proper colour on, proper Tzeentchian colour. So that inset there is pretty much dry. So a little bit more paint, like so. Apply it, add, hey presto, check out that opaque chisel baby. That's the sort of coat you should be aiming for. Again, it's a few little bits on the gold which can be touched up later, but that's a fairly neat contrast between the two colours. Okay, I think that'll do for now.